Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's Self-Directed Saturday. We really appreciate all of you joining us today. It looks like we've still got some people coming in. For today's presentation, I'm actually extremely excited about this one. We have Austin Dean here with us speaking today and talking about wealth design for financial independence. More specifically, Austin is actually a CFP. He's a financial planner, wealth advisor up in the Washington State area. He has not only been more so in the financial realm on the public side, but has been a very actually experienced investor himself on the private side as well with, real estate notes and things like that. So he's got a really good understanding of the types of things that we do here at Quest. So we'll jump into that here in a little bit. I am going to just do a brief introduction about Quest. So we do always kind of like to do this for folks that are not as familiar with us, or maybe hearing about Quest for the first time. You're not familiar with what a self-directed IRA is or anything like that. That's kind of where we come into play, and we do like to provide a lot of education. So that's why if you've seen on our website, most likely that's probably where you registered. We host events every week, sometimes multiple times a week in the Texas area, which is where we're located, but also online. So this is a Saturday event that we host every Saturday, 12 to 1 Central Time. We're about probably now one of the biggest self-directed custodians in the state of Texas, if not the biggest. We've got around 120 employees, staff-wise, 34 of which, or 33 now, do have what's called a CISP designation, or Certified IRA Services Professional license. Basically what that is, it's a pretty rigorous course that you have to go through, geared specifically towards IRAs. It accumulates with a 2 to 3 hour exam. So that's one of the more prestigious designations we do have kind of within our side of the industry. We currently hold around 2.7 billion in assets under administration. So that's just a little bit about us. I don't want to take too much time with the intro. That way we can get into the presentation. Hope you guys are excited as well. Throughout Austin's presentation, and while he's talking, if you guys do have questions, go ahead and post them down in the comments, and we will get to those towards the end. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A after he kind of runs through his presentation. So with that, I would like to introduce Austin. He is actually the founder and CEO of Waystone Advisors. He and I have actually talked a little bit in the past. Very excited to kind of hear from an RIA perspective, from a financial plan perspective, a little bit more on the private real estate investment side. So with that, I will go ahead and bring Austin up. We really appreciate you taking some time to speak with our side of the industry and the community that we serve a little bit today, Austin.
Yeah, so I appreciate having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to just go ahead and pull up your slides here and just let you jump right into it. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. I appreciate it. Yeah, I appreciate all of you guys joining us on this hopefully sunny Saturday. This is usually the time on a Saturday where I take my 4 kids and I walk to a coffee shop. So they're going to hold me to a solid time, so we can do that still, even if we start going long. So I won't take you guys too long, but agenda-wise, I'm really hoping by the end of the day to leave you guys with some extra some data on how do I create a framework for financial decision making. What are some of the core tools outside of real estate that can complement and enhance the financial independence and real estate goals you guys have? Talk through how do these work together, walk through some case studies of just some sample clients that we've worked with in the past. And if we have time for any more current topics like interest rates and inflation and those kinds of things, happy to dive into that. But excited to walk you guys through what a lot of our clients talk about is how do we take traditional tools and resources and combine them with non-traditional real estate lending, business ownership into a more functional system for creating financial independence. To add to what Colin said, so I've been doing this for over a decade as the owner of my own firm. We have 5 staff, 2 advisors, growing pretty rapidly. And really love real estate, love the passive, the alternative assets. And I had the benefit of getting into this industry when I was 21, looking at the traditional tools and realizing, a lot of those lock me up until I'm in my 60s. How do I do other things that complement that so that I can be more flexible and more in control of my wealth building ahead of time? So with that in mind, just want to talk through a little bit of traditional versus entrepreneurial investing. One of the things that I love about Quest and the ability to have self-directeds is that allows us to take our 401ks, our IRA assets, and be a little bit more flexible in control of them than if we were to keep them just as where they're at. Because if we look at any really wealthy, really successful person, they aren't just cramming money into their retirement accounts. They are expanding and buying businesses, buying real estate, using leverage strategically. So that's where when we talk to clients about how do we create and rethink wealth, there are a few different pieces that we always want to be assessing and looking at when talking through different asset types. So some of our core tenets are, when I'm looking at this, does it create more flexibility and control of my assets? Does it allow my money to do multiple things at one time? Is it aligned with my time horizon for my most important goals? So if I want to be financially independent early, is this enhancing that or is it detracting from that? And then kind of lastly, does it create the ability for me to have strategic leverage of that asset, using that money in more than one way at the same time, or leveraging my time so that I can do more higher dollar, more productive activities? So the fact that you guys are here, I'm sure means that you guys are already thinking about, how do I think about debt in a way that is more of a strategic enhancer as opposed to a morally good or bad thing, which is a common unlearning we find people have to do. And thinking about, okay, if I can leverage real estate, if I leverage lending, how do I create passive streams that allow me to have more flexibility of my financial plan and be financially independent sooner? And in a lot of times transition to, how do I leave a more lasting legacy and create the lifestyle that I want, that is more enjoyable for me and my family? So with that in mind, this is one of the core things I like to start off when I'm teaching about framework for investing. This is a really simple one, but we want to break the different asset types we have into different time horizon buckets. So short, mid, long term. So in general, that short-term bucket is what you'd think it is. Bank accounts, money market accounts. This is money where we're willing to exchange growth potential for liquidity and safety. Generally, we don't want to have more than 3 to 6 months in this bucket for the most part, because it's money that's not doing anything for us in exchange for that quick access. I imagine this resonates with a lot of you guys, but in general, the media, the culture teaches us to skip that midterm bucket, go straight to that long-term bucket, which is qualified retirement accounts, 401ks, Roth IRAs. The big benefit of these in a traditional sense is that there's the opportunity for you to defer taxes. So if you think taxes are going to be lower in the future, or you're going to live off of less, there's potential for that. It also allows you to have access to free money from your employer via a match if you work for an employer that provides a match. It does create the restrictions on age. So 59 and a half rules in general for the growth on IRAs and for all of the money on traditionals. And that's part of why, because we get funneled as a society into overfunding, max funding, deferring our money into accounts like that, why it's important to have resources like Quest Trust that we can use that money that we've built up intentionally to be more real estate, more income generating if we want to, as a part of a way of enhancing your broad plan. But for those of us that have surplus, that have maxed those things out, that want to have more flexibility, maybe want to be retired in their 30s, 40s, 50s instead of waiting to their 60s, that's where it's important to think about putting money into that midterm vehicle. So this is money that's doing more than nothing, that we can access whenever we want to without penalties, some of which have tax benefits, some of which certainly taxable investment accounts are going to be taxable, but generally have the ability to do some tax loss harvesting. The cash values of life insurance, when done right, have the ability to grow and be accessed tax-free. And with that in mind, I tend to funnel all of my money through those core, the majority of my funds through that midterm bucket, because I can either pull them in and out, or I can use strategic leverage to pull money in and out of those while keeping my money invested. So my money is doing more than one thing at the same time. And with that in mind, that creates some diversification of different assets, different time horizons, different growth profiles, and the ability to leverage assets outside of just real estate. So we'll talk more about that in a second. But with that in mind, I was talking a couple of years ago to another advisor who, I mean, all he does is work with clients that have 500 million and up, and we were talking about strategies that typically are for just those wealthy people that have access to assets that are more alternative, that have access to advisors who are teaching them things. And I was sharing with him the stuff that we do for real estate, and he coined this term when we were having that conversation. He said, "Oh, that's an arbitrage engine or a spread engine." The idea of how do we take cheap bank money, take somebody else's resources, use that to acquire an asset where you get all of the growth, appreciation, tax benefits, and cash flow and excess cash flow from. Now, really, that's why we love real estate in the first place, is that we have the ability to use and create those arbitrages, create those spreads. So from a leverage perspective, having the ability to get a bank to give us money that allows us to buy an asset that we couldn't otherwise. So for instance, buying a rental property, being able to put 75% of that down payment from the bank, put 25% of your money, gives you the ability to use your money in multiple places at once, but also you get all of the growth and appreciation on that, which allows for enhanced returns because you're using strategic, intentional leverage. And on the spread side, when we're trying to create a spread, a simple way to think about a spread from a real estate perspective is if you have cash on cash, let's say you're making $2,000 a month of cash flow, it only costs you $1,000 to service the mortgage, pay the property manager, and take care of all the other costs associated with that. You've now created a cash flow spread where you're making more than it costs you to have that asset. The nice thing is, from a financial planning perspective, real estate is not the only asset that has the ability for us to create an arbitrage engine, if you will. And that's a lot of where I wanted to focus on, talking through things like the life insurance, the taxable investment accounts, and how do we enhance those to be able to create multiple assets that are all benefiting from arbitrage engines, while still giving you more accessibility, more diversification, more tax benefits, creating some protection for you and your family, both now and in the future. So this one, I imagine many of you have heard of and or are utilizing different life insurance vehicles, although it's not as common as you'd think. The whole life insurance is one type of permanent life insurance. There's a few other types, index universal life, variable universal life are the other core permanent assets. When I say permanent, I mean life insurance that it lasts as long as you do. So just a very high level 101 way to think about life insurance is a lot like renting versus owning, where just like when you rent a home versus owning, the big benefit of renting is it's a low monthly cost, little to no front or back end cost to get into that home to live in. But the downside is when you leave that, you don't have any of that equity. But the big benefit is it tends to be like you don't have to have a large down payment to get into it. It usually is less than what a mortgage costs for the average person. But the goal is always going to be going from renting to eventually owning. Similar thing on the life insurance. Term insurance is a great tool for creating wealth protection. It tends to have the lowest amount of monthly cost for the protection somebody needs. But the only way to get money from that is to die during that term, which nobody wants to do. And the goal is to eventually get rid of term insurance, either because you have the wealth to not need it or you've replaced it with something more permanent. Whole life is a good example of that permanency, where there is a death benefit, but if we're structuring it properly, the vast majority of it is going towards creating cash value that acts a lot like a Roth IRA. I imagine many of you are aware, Roth IRAs have the benefit of it's after-tax money, so money you've already paid taxes on. It grows tax deferred inside that tax protected vehicle. And as long as you wait till after 59 and a half, not just your contributions, but also the growth are accessible tax-free. Cash flows of life insurance work very similar, but without the 59 and a half rule. So it's money that you can access whenever you want to, tax-free. It grows tax deferred. It is money that is creditor protected, partially or fully in most states. Most of the funds that I have in real estate are funds that I use the life insurance as a pass-through. So I funneled my money into the whole life insurance. It's chugging along at about 5.5%. Tax-free year over year. And to give some context for that, if you had a savings account that's paying you 8 to 9%, and you're in that 24% or higher tax bracket, that's a similar return that a life insurance chassis is doing it in a tax-free environment with that same level of risk, where the market might be down 20% or up 20, the real estate market might be up, up 20, down 20, but the whole life is just going to be chugging along between 4 to 6%, like clockwork, which makes it easier to leverage. So another thing to be aware of when we're thinking about risk, the more a bank will allow us to access, like the higher the line of credit they're willing to access, the safer we can view that asset to be. So that's where we know, a personally owned home, they're going to give us sometimes up to 100% because they know you really want to stay in that home. Rental properties, 75%. Investment accounts, which we'll talk to in a second, depending on the allocation. I mean, if we had 100% Microsoft, for instance, which is an easy example for me being in the Pacific Northwest, generally banks are only going to give 40 to 50% line of credit on an account like that because there's so much potential for up and down. With a whole life policy, whether you're using a policy loan from the insurance carrier or an Sbloc, an insurance-backed line of credit, which is what I generally use, and which is usually a more attractive way to access that money when it's not a high interest rate environment where the yield curve is inverted like it is right now. That allows me to access 95 cents on the dollar. And while those rates are high now, if I'm using them for investment purposes, and I always add the caveat of talk to your CPA, but the interest that is being paid on those policy loans, on the insurance-backed lines of credit, should be tax deductible, which allows for us to actually have a spread between what the life insurance is growing at and the cost to access that in most environments, including right now, if we're taking advantage of the tax deductibility in the right situation. I mean, going back to last year and really the last decade, my life insurance policies chugging along about 5.5% tax-free. I could access those through a line of credit at less than 4%, usually closer to 3%, which after a few years of building that, creating cash value that's chugging along, I had essentially created a bank account where if I access that money, I can access almost all of it while still making 1 to 2% spread on that money while using it. It's tax favorable. And if something happens to me, I have a death benefit that protects my family, which, as I mentioned earlier, I got 4 kids. That's important to me. And we'll talk about this more in a little bit, but having that permanent death benefit also creates a really important vehicle for long-term legacy and estate planning if we're going to be having a large portion of our assets in real estate and illiquid assets that impact our estate value. The next piece, I'd be curious, and it's a tough part on these kinds of video chats to have a raise of hands, but securities-backed lines of credit is another powerful tool for being able to duplicate your money. Obviously, we find a lot of value in self-directed and retirement accounts, but one of the downsides to that is that the IRS has made it illegal to collateralize retirement accounts. So we can't get lines of credit backed by them. So we can't duplicate our money in quite the same way as we can with a taxable investment account. So taxable investment account is really just an investment account that you can hold stocks and bonds in, and that can be done in index funds, mutual funds, ETFs, individual stocks and bonds, iShares, all the different types. And we have the ability to bring in banks that will come in, they'll look at the asset allocation and they'll say, hey, we're willing to give you a line of credit on this account for X percentage. As I alluded to earlier, for accounts that are undiversified, that are 100% stock, they only have 1 or 2 stock, generally that's going to be only 40 to 50% because banks don't want the market to drop and you to actually have more debt than you've used. Now, for me, choosing me as an example, I have a portfolio where I've deliberately blended in about 35 to 40% bonds, about 60% stocks. There's thousands of holdings. Use some academic research to overweight towards things that outperform over time. Stress tested it for 2008 to see, hey, if this were to drop, would I have a negative collateral position? And I actually have the ability to access 70 to 75% loan to value on my money. Now I'm giving up about, maybe 1 to 2% potential growth return on those assets over time by not being as aggressive. But if I can duplicate that money at nearly 70 cents on the dollar, and I'm using that intentionally to lend out and create 10, 12, 13%, I'm putting it into syndications and partnerships that I'm expecting to be high teens, low 20s. My net growth over time by being intentional with those lines of credit is actually going to be meaningfully higher. And by having that line of credit, it gives me better investing behavior because I'm not worried about pulling my money out of the market when it's down. And I've created more flexibility and control for me, which is what one of those core tenets I mentioned at the beginning of the talk of does this investment create more flexibility and control of me for me with my assets and my resources. Now this is something I created about 3 or 4 years ago after realizing that there wasn't a really good way to explain how these assets all work together. So I call this the 3 pillars of wealth design. And this works for both traditional models and for the non-traditional models. You'll see here, I created, my team and I were noticing when we did this talk a few days ago, actually live at a local real estate meetup group, that some of these are pretty small. So I apologize for that. But there's a lot of research that says that traditional or non-traditional, you want to have 3 core asset types to be able to create more return, more flexibility, and a higher legacy value. So we see that top bucket, that's our income and alternative investments. On the traditional side, an income producing asset, something like Social Security or pensions or annuities. For the more non-traditional investor, that's things like rental properties, private lending, passive business ownership, syndications, real estate, equity funds. As a core, this that top pillar is really defined by assets that are going to be relatively illiquid, that kick up high levels of passive income, and oftentimes create tax benefits. Now that bottom right, we have our market-based assets, which is split into retirement assets and taxable investments. Retirement, as we talked about earlier, benefits of having free money, and if we're using self-directeds, we have the ability to invest and actually hold some of the income-producing assets inside that retirement vehicle. But in general, the market is a liquid asset that has fluctuating returns, but over time we expect it to have fairly high returns, just non-linearly. On the stable side, this is where traditionally that's building money up in cash and then tossing it into something, building it up again. And as hopefully you've gathered, if we can build something like a whole life policy, or depending on somebody's risk tolerance, something like an index universal life or something like that, those are assets that become a better version of cash, that have tax benefits, that are leverageable. So we can have that money growing, have it flexible, but have it be able to be deployed into and creating those income and alternative assets. So with that in mind, put this all together and bring together some of the concepts we've been talking about. If we have investable income here, we want to be aware of where is it being deployed. So if we're already getting the free money in our retirement accounts, I don't know if you guys can see the drawing that I'm doing on the PowerPoint. If we're funneling our money through the taxable investment accounts, through that life insurance, and then we're intentionally using those lines of credit on the life insurance and investment accounts to then acquire and create alternative income producing tax benefited assets, now your money is doing more than one thing at the same time. And while you're building wealth, what this allows us to do is to say, okay, now we've created assets that are, whether it's the real estate syndications that are going to pay out a 1.7 multiple, as a syndicator I was talking to recently, or lending funds that are paying 10 to 12%. If we have those creating income streams and we're using them to cycle back in through those different assets, now we've created a flywheel where your money is doing more than one thing at the same time. It also allows us to say, okay, we have a permanent death benefit that protects my family while we're building wealth. And that permanent death benefit also creates some liquidity long-term to be able to make sure that my assets go the places that I want it to go as tax efficiently as possible. Because if we do a great job of building real estate and business assets, that means we're going to have to be serious about figuring out how do we buy out the government, navigate estate taxes so that our money goes the places we want it to go. Here. But then from a financial independence perspective, once you actually get to the point where you're financially independent, ideally we've created a system where you have a floor of income that's kicking in no matter what. The older generations call this mailbox money. Excuse me. We built up enough assets so that when taxes are low and our investment accounts are up, we have the ability to pull from this asset. And then if we've built our stable assets intentionally, we have the ability to say, hey, the market's down, taxes are high. We want to make adjustments to our market-based assets let's pull money from over here that is tax favorable, that's uncorrelated and unaffected by the fluctuation of the market. And now you have 3 assets that are growing differently, creating income differently, and you control your destiny in a much greater way than if you had only 1 or 2 of these different parts of your financial plan. While this wasn't real estate focused, Ernst & Young actually came out with some research last year that talked about the importance of having what's called a volatility buffer, something like that life insurance we talked about, and the importance of having passive recurring income streams to be able to make sure that our other assets can perform at a higher level and leave a higher legacy value. So with that in mind, wanted to briefly touch on estate and legacy planning. For those who don't know, the current federal estate tax limits are a little over $11 million, and those are set to sunset back to what they were previous rates in 2026, which would go from 11 million per person down to closer to 6. I found it's incredibly easy to inefficiently do real estate, buy a handful of single family properties, 1031 exchange them into duplexes or larger, and then let that debt pay down, that appreciation happen, and suddenly, oh man, we have a federal estate tax issue. Being in Washington State has an state estate tax that's a little bit over $2.1 million. So it's once again incredibly easy to get over that rate as well. And depending on what state you're at, once again, just using Washington because it's where I'm at. If I don't plan for it, I have the risk of accidentally giving up to 60 cents on the dollar to Uncle Sam if I don't plan for buying Uncle Sam out and making sure that the assets that I want go the way they want. I was grabbing lunch a couple of days ago with another advisor who was talking about a gal who had inherited a bunch of buildings in San Francisco from her parents, but her parents hadn't done any estate planning, didn't have any permanent life insurance or liquidity to be able to buy out the government. She had to sell 40% of her buildings, mortgage another 20% to be able to keep the rest. And certainly that's not what she was hoping to do. And even had shared that there's a lot of those buildings had sentimental value because they'd been in the family for so long. So having an intentional plan of how do we build wealth now, have a plan for distributing that wealth, but also making sure that when our time comes and we want to give that money to kids and charities, do we have an intentional plan for how are we going to do that? How are we going to create the liquidity? Many of you are familiar with the idea that real estate has a step up in cost basis when you pass away if you're owning it. Now, there's a common misconception I've found that step up in cost basis also applies to estate taxes, and that is not true. That just applies to if your heirs sell that property, they have a new cost basis in that. But that whole value is still attributable to estate taxes. So want to make sure that for those of us that work smart, work hard, that we're leaving the impact that we want with those assets. So excited to circle back around in a little bit to talk through some of those, answer any questions, but wanted to give a couple of case studies and examples, loosely related to clients that we've worked with in the past. Being in this, the Western Washington, Seattle area, we work with a lot of tech employees, tech executives, at the Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google, those types of places that have great income. They're working really hard. And I found this was true with doctors as well of love what we do, working really hard, don't want to have to work this hard for forever. How do we take the good income or the good resources we have and do it intentionally to create the ability to be financially independent? Or for a lot of them, it's, they call it work optionality. It's I have the resources so that I'm working because I want to, not because I have to, which makes it more fun. So this sample client is early 40s, married, had more kids than me, which I know is surprising. He had annual income of over $700,000, and he'd been pretty heads down for the last 15, 20 years, and looked up to find that he had almost $5 million in Microsoft stock. And he thought, I should probably be more intentional with this, diversify this, and what are the things that I can do to create more income so that I have the ability to pay for college for my 7 kids, be able to be financially independent the way we want, fund, the purchase of a much larger home. So we looked at that. We took their situation. These are just some high level bullet points, but we repositioned a good chunk of the Microsoft stock and are continuing to do that systematically over the next several years. That allowed us to create an investment account that had 70 to 75% loan to value, created some life insurance policies, both of which they've since leveraged into passive income and a handful of syndications that are creating over $100,000 a year of new gross passive income while keeping all that money invested. And we've set aside enough money for about $1 million home remodel they're doing to be able to make their home large enough for them and their 7 kids. From a future goal perspective, they're in a position where, he wants to work for another 5-10 years. They're going to be able to save another $400,000 or $500,000 a year, if not more. And once their home remodel gets done, they wanted to look at how we continue to create additional cash flow to be able to cover those costs and build a ramp to be able to essentially create that work optionality for him. And he's already, as you can imagine, in that position where state and estate taxes are a consideration. So we've already started having the conversation about how do we buy out Uncle Sam. And this is maybe a topic for another time, but it's when we're thinking about leverage, there are actually some tools called premium financed or bank financed life insurance, where you can create an irrevocable life insurance trust. You can put a life insurance policy in it and have the bank fund it for you, so that your money is actually staying outside of your estate, continuing to grow it. And it's a really powerful way if somebody has more than $15 million in general of estate value, to be able to use leverage to cover and solve some of those estate tax concerns. The next one, this is a client came to me. There's a longtime real estate investor. That was actually all they had really was cash and physical real estate in that top tier of the pillars that we were looking at before. They were getting to the point where they wanted to have more of their assets passive. They realized they needed to have some estate planning conversations. Had noticed that the money that was in the bank was not doing anything, and thought, there's got to be a better way to use this than just pulling it, then building it up, and then tossing it into real estate. So we looked at that and also discussed, they're in a position where they want to start slowly, hiring property managers and or selling off some of their real estate, because they have enough and they've been self-managing for the last 20 years. And it's become more of a job and less of a financial freedom component for them. So over the last several years, we've shifted a lot of the money from their bank accounts into whole life policies, moved over their taxable investment accounts, set up a line of credit. They now have over $2 million available in lines of credit. The cash is now growing to counter inflation as much as it can, given the short-term inflation issues. They have over $5 million of death benefit that's set aside for estate liquidity. They were in a position where because they now feel like they have the option to not have to, they've used their line of credit a couple of times to just use as a let's be all cash buyer for assets, refinanced those debts, paid off their lines of credit, and have done that a couple of times to continue to add to their wealth. A good chunk of their money is now in private lending that's paying them 10 to 13% passively, and other real estate funds. And they can now see a path towards being more financially independent and having estate liquidity. And lastly, this is I love all these scenarios, but this is one that's perhaps more common, is the up and coming hustler. I want to be financially independent sooner. I'm not satisfied with the traditional ways that things are done. I have a client who married, young child, household income over 300,000. This particular client wasn't just real estate focused, but they wanted to be able to buy and flip businesses and grow that as a part of their portfolio. And they had just come to me after selling a large rental property that they'd actually been part of the contractor on helping build, had about $400,000 in cash. And we said, okay, how do we make sure that your family is protected as you build this wealth? How do we make it more leverageable, continue to create cash values, and give you a path towards financial independence in the next 10 years if that's what you want? So for this particular client, did a lot of similar things, established a life insurance policy. And I think for them, we actually blended in a little bit of term insurance to make sure they had a protection for based on them having young kids. Moved over a good chunk of that money in cash into investment accounts, set up, and should say $150,000 in available lines of credit, which she then actually used to help buy a business, which she's then been using the business to pay that line of credit back, has done a couple of other ground up flips in the last couple of years. And we're on track for, in the next 10 years, for having $10,000 to $15,000 a month in passive income and the flexibility to travel and take her kid all the places that she always wanted to. So really quickly, this is me, and Pete Mathias is the other advisor on my team. I actually had the benefit of, he was a longtime client, spent 15 years at Cisco. He used the strategies we talked about today to acquire, I think he had 36 doors and another $600,000 to $700,000 in syndications and passive passive real estate funds, which gave him the flexibility to quit his job and let me recruit him away to join my team, which is fun. We're currently in the process of trying to hire another 1 or 2 advisors to expand our capacity. But for many of you, if you guys end up wanting to work with us and have a consultation, Pete will be a core part of that process, both because he's very smart and has a lot of experience with doing real estate and some of the leveraging tactics we talked about today. So lastly, we'll open it up for questions, but anyone who wants to have the opportunity to have a free consultation, see if this is a good fit to work with us and our team, the QR code will take you to just a quick 4 or 5 question survey and the ability for my team to follow up, schedule a conversation. For any of you guys that found today's conversation intriguing, or you want to know more, have questions about it that we don't end up covering today, would love to have the opportunity for my team and I to help see if the strategies we have and our relationship could be a potential value add partnership to your financial independence and legacy goals. Awesome.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Austin. Yeah, we again really appreciate your time. A lot of wonderful information. Just a few things that I thought it would be really great to expand on. I mean, in your experience and as you've kind of, worked with clients and especially more on the alternative side, how has it affected maybe your clients and even within your personal portfolio? How have you seen alternative assets make a difference or an impact on, diversification, returns, retirement savings, all of that kind of stuff, as opposed to just, your more traditional types of assets in the market?
Yeah, I love that question. And I've had the benefit of seeing it a variety of different ways, because we have 500 clients in 30 states, and that means everything from private lending to single to apartments to syndications to quite a few clients right now that are trying out this short-term rental world to try to get some of the tax benefits associated with that. I've found that oftentimes having a more alternative income producing asset feels like it gives a little more control over their destiny. Like there's a certain level of, hey, I can manage this property, create some more cash flow. I'm getting some tax benefits, so getting that K1. Even somebody who wants something as simple as, hey, I have this line of credit, I want to leverage it into lending. Even with interest rates being high, if we're creating an extra 4 or 5% passive income that somebody didn't have before, that creates a lot more stability and kind of safety of, okay, I have my money is doing something even in the chaos of the ups and downs of the interest rate world, the market, all those different things. Yeah, absolutely.
And how does Waystone kind of come into play when looking at different alternative assets and working with clients in that sense?
Yeah. So being fiduciaries, which means we have a legal responsibility. We're working with clients to give advice that's in their best long-term interest, and also being independent, so product agnostic. Although, to clarify, we are licensed to help with the insurance, the investments. We do manage that for clients, but we're able to step back and say, if your goals are broadly, financial independence, protect your family, college, all these different things, and within this time frame, it allows us to have a framework for helping our clients diagnose and assess, is this asset a good fit for me, right? Because it's particularly in the real estate space. Right now, some of the syndications and partnership groups that bring their deals to me so that I can assess it, talk about it with clients when appropriate. I have some that are no cash flow, but we're expecting 20 to 30% IRR in the next 18 to 24 months. And I have other ones that have no upside potential, but are paying a 13% cash flow for the next 2 years. And being able to say which one of these is most aligned with kind of the time horizons and the flexibility that a client needs to be able to achieve their goals. So that's a roundabout answer to say we get a lot of those deals across our plate, which is how I got connected to Quest Trust. Actually, a couple of the syndicators that I use that are great groups said, you need to connect with Quest Trust if you're looking for a good self-directed bank. But being able to bring those to clients, but also be the filter for, is this a good fit for your particular financial goals, is a lot of where we step in on the alternative side.
Awesome. Okay. So we do have, it looks like at least couple questions here. Let me go ahead and pull these up. So, sorry, I don't know why there's a fly in my face. Okay, one question from Andrew. Do you recommend a SEP IRA for small business owners who are pre-revenue?
Are pre-revenue. I guess I have to clarify what pre-revenue means from that perspective. A lot of it depends. So SEP IRAs in general, if somebody said, I don't want to be retired until I'm 60, I want to have money that's tax deferred that I can then use, and I intend to not have employees or not have that many employees for a few years, a SEP IRA can be a good place to be able to stick a good chunk of money with limited administrative costs. And certainly I imagine the Quest team could step in some of these questions on the retirement account, qualified retirement account side. But I would say it really depends on what's your time horizon for when you want to be financially independent. How many employees do you plan to have? Because that'll impact the type of retirement account that makes the most sense. And what kind of assets do you want to hold inside of that retirement account?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to double down on that, I think, this is an interesting topic of conversation and a question that we actually get pretty frequently when talking about businesses that are pre-revenue, right? Because where a lot of these SEP contributions come from are going to be that revenue, that profit that the business is receiving. So
Yep.
Some people do like to set those up, a little bit beforehand and prepare for that. Certainly the investments that you're interested are going to make a big play into whether you're setting this SEP IRA up with, a more alternative custodian like Quest or somebody who's more within the public side, right? So, and then the employees absolutely are going to play a big part in that too. Just because, especially with the SEP, there are certain qualifications that you have to make when setting up the plan. And obviously, Andrew, if you did have some more questions about this, happy to dive into more, if you wanted to give us a call or something like that. But there are certain qualifications that you have to set up for the plan, which do have limitations, right? Like 3 years of employment. I want to say the max age you can set is like 21, where those individuals you'll have to start participating or contributing or, giving them essentially a salary deferral as well. Or not necessarily a salary deferral, I guess, because it's coming from the employer side. But yeah, those are
percentage
things that a lot of considerations there. Great question though. Let's see. Okay, yeah, he did clarify pre gross revenue.
Yep. So, I mean, a solo entrepreneur is certainly going to have more flexibility. I'd be curious, Colin, on your thoughts on like a solo 401k versus a SEP in that situation. From an administrative perspective, but I would still layer on the filters of from an income tax perspective. Do you think you'll be in a higher or lower tax bracket in the future? And also, what is the time horizon at which you want to be able to be financially independent, which will then dictate how much money do you think you're going to want to save into a retirement account versus outside of retirement account that might be able to allow you to be more flexible up front. So it's that balance that is really more on a situation by situation basis.
Yeah, absolutely. And the SEP IRA and solo 401k give you a lot of the same advantages, right? Whether you're, looking for some tax deductions for the business, being able to contribute, start saving for retirement and get into some more alternative assets is, what we see most of the time. But there are certainly, unique traits and characteristics to each of the accounts, which is going to, vary as far as the fit for person to person. Certainly solo entrepreneurs do. There's a lot of eligibility there for solo 401k. So yeah, that's a good point as well.
Yeah, and Andrew, talking to a Quest rep would be good. I mean, if you want to talk with me and my team as well to get some complementary perspectives, feel free.
Yeah. I think that Austin would really give a great perspective on more of the investment side. Sorry, solo 401k is my next question. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's more a longer conversation to be had. And what I like so much, Austin, about your service and your perspective in all of this is, for me personally, coming actually from the RIA side, I was got a financial planning degree in college and was doing that for a little bit before I kind of came full circle. I actually interned at Quest while I was in school, so it's a very unique perspective, and there's not very many financial advisors who really kind of play both sides of the fence with public and private, and incorporate some of that alternative types of assets in their clients' portfolio. So I think that's awesome.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. I think that was all of the questions that we had.
I'm going to assume I answered all of them throughout the case then. So that's it.
Probably so. Yeah. I mean, and those I thought were really great. I kind of had some questions that I was listening at that I wanted to get into as well. And you did do, I think case studies are a great way to kind of show some of the, examples in different ways that this can help individuals. Sorry, let's see. I guess there's another question here. I need to set up. Oh, yeah, Carol, I would just say, reach out to us afterwards. But if there are no other questions, there is one more, Karine. How do you used to get SBLOC for your clients? I'm not sure I'm familiar with what SBLOC is.
So SBLOC stands for Securities-Backed Line of Credit.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So for us to get, better rates, more ease of access, we've actually looped in a couple of banks that are integrated with some of our core money managers. So while there are different banks, different ways to do it, we found that the best version is if we have the ability to manage those assets for our clients, we can get that set up for them. It's fairly easy. Currently, one of our core banks we use is called Supernova. It's online. Generally, once we get something set up, like we can get a line of credit set up in 24 to 48 hours. Oftentimes, once assets are in the investment account that we're managing, and if a client wants to access that money, you can get that money once again in 24 to 48 hours. It's a really quick and easy way to do it. Something I didn't mention about securities-backed lines of credit as well as insurance-backed lines of credit is both of those, because they're backed by your investment and insurance cash values, like they're backed by a liquid asset. They don't report to your credit. They don't impact your debt to income at all. Unlike a HELOC, which has its own benefits, but a HELOC is it's backed by an illiquid asset. The bank has to report it to your credit, have it impact your debt to income, because the only way to pay that off outside of your income is to sell that property. So the securities-backed line of credit and the iBlocks are more flexible from that perspective than most other lines of credit.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognize too that, like you had mentioned, that's not necessarily something that's capable with an IRA, but it's so important to be able to utilize, different areas of investing, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be in a retirement account. I think the personal investments too are a really important aspect in anyone's, portfolio. Mm-hmm. Another question, well, I guess more of a statement that Carol had. I think, Carol, this is actually something where Austin will be able to really play a big role in helping to educate and providing some knowledge, right? And how you might be able to use some of that money in different things of that nature from the financial planner perspective, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of my designations, I'm a retirement income certified professional, in addition to being a CFP. So there's a lot that goes into this, and I get it. Yeah, Colin, do you want to share Byron's question?
Yeah, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm. So a securities-backed line of credit is based on the value of the assets in your non-retirement investment account. So it's once again, just using one of my accounts as an example. So I have a taxable investment account that has $600,000 or so in it. I have a line of credit that I can access, I think about $430,000 of that right now. It's maybe a little bit more. It's about 72% loan to value last time I checked. And the ways that I can either increase it or decrease it So the more we have on treasuries and corporate bonds and cash and those kinds of things, those have higher leverageability because they have less fluctuation. The more stocks we have, the lower that line of credit is going to be. But then one of the ways we can mitigate that is if we have thousands of stocks. So if we only have one or two stocks, that's going to create more risk for the bank. So really, and this is something that we've specialized in over the last few years, is how do we create portfolios that are diversified, can outperform over time, that also the banks can look at and say, this is diversified, this feels fairly low risk. We'll give a higher level of accessibility because we're comfortable with the level of risk that's being created in that portfolio.
Yeah, great. And there's another one here tied to those lines of credit as well, which is probably a little bit harder to tackle. Typical interest rates with those, I mean, is certainly going to vary, right?
It can vary, and also even like how it is paid back is going to be different. So just using, a HELOC or a cash out refinance. Cash out refinance is going to reset a schedule where there's going to be 30 years, and there's going to be some principal payments in addition to the interest rates. Historically, those are going to be fairly low, although I'd say usually a little bit higher than what the Sbloc and Ibloc are based on, because those are connected to short-term interest rates. So if those you haven't seen, right now the Treasury curve is crazy inverted, and I'd say 9 out of 10 years the Treasury curve looks like short-term is really low here, and the long-term is up here. Right now it's flipped. So I'll give some context for that. Right now, my securities-backed line of credit is a little over 7% cost to access. Same thing, my insurance-backed line of credit is about 7% as well. My current insurance-backed line of credit is prime -1 with a floor of 3%. So this time last year, I could actually access 95% of my cash values at 3% while it was growing at 5.5. And that was before factoring in the ability to deduct that if I was using it for investment related purposes, as an example. Similarly, the securities-backed line of credit, it depends. Sometimes those are prime. It used to be the LIBOR. Now they're using the SOFR, the secured overnight financing rate, which has gone up pretty much with the Fed rate bumps. So it went from being 0.1, 0.2 a little over a year ago to now being about 5%. Depending on the size of the account. So on the securities-backed line of credit side, our clients that have $4 or $5 million of money and that have a line of credit for $3 million north, we're looking at there being the 1 month SOFR plus a spread that's pretty small. So those rates are still as low as in the 6s potentially, even with the rates bumping up. For smaller accounts, so we have the resource to be able to, and I don't always recommend this because it takes I don't want to add too much risk when people don't have a whole lot yet, but if somebody has a portfolio of $40,000, we can get a line of credit on that for up to 2025. So we have clients that have wanted to use that to get into our first single family property, which is there are a lot of places where you can actually do that where you can't in Seattle right now from a real estate perspective. So it's a range. I would expect once interest rates to go back down for Sblocs and Iblocs to get back to being somewhere in the 3s and 4s, and as well as cash out refinances. When I talk to my real estate centric mortgage brokers, they're generally assuming that a cash out refinance in just 30-year going to get somewhere between that 4 to low 5s once interest rates settle back down. HELOCs are generally going to be a little bit more expensive than Iblocs and Sblocs because the asset it's backed by being illiquid, but I expect in the next 2 years things to get back down to having it be a little more reasonable. Not quite what it was 2 years ago, but when I assess and look at using my insurance-backed line of credit, for instance, I don't need prime to go back to 2.75 for it to get back to the rate that it was before. Because if I'm prime -1, if prime comes back and it's 4, I'm still at 3%, and I have that 2% spread when I'm accessing those cash values. So.
Great. Well, I think that's all the questions that we've got. I do want to just go ahead and throw y'all's contact information back up there, and then I would say 99% of the time, most of the questions come 5 minutes after the webinar ends. So guys, please feel free to reach out to Quest, reach out to Austin and his team at Waystone. We'd be happy to help with whatever your needs are, whatever questions you have. Certainly look forward to having some conversations and discussions with all of you. So Austin, again, we really do appreciate your time today.
Appreciate having me out. I appreciate everybody that came, and I hope we can do this again sometime.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Thank you, everybody, and have a great weekend.